Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Michael Hyland. I'm a physical therapist and I specialize in helping persons with Parkinson's disease, just like you. And today I'm going to be doing a brief presentation about cognitive changes associated with Parkinson's disease. This is a non-motor symptom of Parkinson's. Now, the non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's, arguably for people with Parkinson's, are some of the most troubling and distressing symptoms. The movement disorders are bad enough, but the non-motor symptoms can tend to be overarching and even worse than the movement symptoms. And cognition and cognitive changes are just one of those non-motor changes that can be associated with PD. So today I'd like to highlight some of those changes that can happen, the areas of the brain affected and why they change, as well as a little bit of the statistics on how many people with Parkinson's have these changes and what percentage of those changes may occur. So overall, cognitive changes will affect 95% of people with Parkinson's disease. That's a big number. But as you'll see, there's a reason why that number is so large. So with that being said, only 25 to 30% of those people will develop what's called a true dementia. And we'll go into the differences between dementia with Parkinson's and other forms of dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease. In addition to that, up to 50% of people with Parkinson's will have some form of behavioral changes, potentially personality changes, and anxiety. So with that being said, let's dive into the areas of the brain affected by Parkinson's disease, how that relates to cognitive changes and those percentages that we talked about. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see a little visual representation of this. So as you can see up top here, PD, Parkinson's, he's the star of the show because that's who we're highlighting and what we're talking about. But the real topic is going to be the chain of events that might lead to these cognitive changes. So primarily with Parkinson's, what we hear about is the changes in the substantia nigra. That is the largest area of dopamine production in the brain. Those neurons are those neurons are continually dying. And so that is the resulting Parkinson's disease, is those neurons decreasing over their numbers over time and resulting in a lower dopamine production. What does decreased dopamine mean for us or for a person with Parkinson's? Decreased dopamine affects the basal ganglia directly, and the basal ganglia is the area of the brain that is responsible for regulating movement control, as well as sending signals to the frontal lobe of the brain. The frontal lobe of the brain is responsible for things like executive function, task planning, multitasking, etc. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those things mean. But this is cognitive function here. So decreased dopamine affects the basal ganglia, which can affect movement, but also, and importantly, can affect some areas of cognitive function. In addition to that, decreased dopamine also affects an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. And I apologize, I may have spelled this incorrectly. I think it might have two C's, but I'm going to let it go. The nucleus accumbens is the area of the brain in part responsible for things like impulse control, behavior, personality, anxiety, and hallucinations. Or when it's impaired, you can have personality changes, anxiety, and hallucinations. And so in other words, visuospatial orientation, that's a function of the nucleus accumbens, personality, and regulating behavior and impulses. So in other words, if that area of the brain is impaired, you might be really tempted to say something mean to somebody who insults you. Instead of holding back, you just say it. Or you may have issues with impulse control for gambling or sexual activity, things like that. So those can be impaired by Parkinson's disease because of decreased dopamine. So that's two areas of cognition that dopamine affects directly. In addition to that, though, there are two other systems of neurotransmission that are affected. So Parkinson's also affects the cholinergic system, and the serotonergic system. The cholinergic system is responsible for alertness or attention, and the serotonergic system is responsible for mood regulation. And Parkinson's can result in mood changes as well as issues with alertness or attention. With the cholinergic system, the primary neurotransmitter involved is acetylcholine, and that neurotransmitter is responsible for that attention or alertness. And with a decreased acetylcholine, which Parkinson's can affect, you get a loss of clarity, potentially could have brain fog and temporary confusion. And so that is, decision making, things like that. Although that could fall into frontal lobe as well. That is affected by Parkinson's disease. And then the serotonergic system, mood changes. So that is where you get your depression associated with Parkinson's. And again, we mentioned 30 to 50% of people with Parkinson's will have depression. And this is the cause. Apathy is another area. Not having that drive, that motivation to do things. That is a symptom of Parkinson's, is having that apathy. And this area of the brain the system of the brain is one responsible for that. So let's talk just a little bit more about executive function. So we talked about task planning, multitasking, other dysfunctions of the executive parts of the brain, frontal lobe, are troubles finding words. Also, you can have fixation on topics. So think one-track minded, but times 10. Just won't move on from this topic, obsessed with a topic, can't move on, can't change tracks, so to speak. And that can be associated with issues with frontal lobe and executive dysfunction. Depth perception is another area of the frontal lobe, and that can be why people can seem a little more clumsy, maybe bumping into things a little bit more, things like that. So those are other examples of frontal lobe issues. Let's talk a little bit to conclude about the differences between Parkinson's dementia and Alzheimer's dementia, for example. The main difference is that the memory issues associated with Parkinson's are not forgetting information. It's more resulting in issues retrieving information. So there are memories packed in that area of the brain associated with memory. But bringing those memories out to the surface can be the issue with Parkinson's dementia. Those memories are not gone. It's just hard to reach them. And with Alzheimer's dementia, those memories disappear. So that's why people with Alzheimer's dementia tend to forget their own identity. They forget how to eat food or swallow and basic functions. Essentially, they're going from adulthood back to infancy. So they're deteriorating to a point where they're going back to awareness of self, goes from the world out here to right here. And so that's basically how an infant is. A newborn baby only sees and knows what's right here for the first, couple months of life. And then they find their hands and they find their feet, so forth. So imagine that, and then that development is going backwards, collapsing in on itself. That does not happen with Parkinson's dementia. People with Parkinson's dementia don't forget who they are. They don't forget their loved ones. They just don't remember, or I should say they have that difficulty with bringing things to the surface. So that's the main difference. And that I don't think that's an oversimplification. That's the way I've heard it explained by experts that do specialize in neurobehavior. So yes, that's basically the whole topic in a nutshell. I shouldn't say in a nutshell, it's a pretty big topic to unpack, but that's the summary of the information that I have for you today. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I hope that you find that interesting and informative as well. One final thought I have too, especially if you're a caregiver of somebody with Parkinson's disease and they do have some form of memory issues or dementia, is try to remember to coach and to guide your loved one or whoever you're giving care to, rather than harping on the fact that they don't remember things. So if somebody doesn't remember, don't say, "Well, don't you remember?" Or "How could you forget that? I just told you that." They can't remember what they forget. Okay, right? So just gently remind them because they can't remember. Otherwise, they would remember. So it doesn't help them or you to say, don't you remember? Well, no, they don't remember. So all you need to do is simply guide or coach them gently and say, like, well, now just remember, I told you this and that and the other, and that's what we're going to do. So just bring them back to the memory rather than saying, well, don't you remember what I told you? Things like that. So it can be very easy to jump to that, especially it can be very frustrating for people, understandably, especially dealing with a loved one or someone you're caring for. And, those memories, it's like they never had the conversation with you or whatever. So something to remember. But anyway, that's all the information I have on this. Also, I want to post a link in the comments in the description below, I should say, to a video by the Davis Phinney Foundation for Parkinson's, which is a great nonprofit where you can find tons of information. There's a really nice 25 or so minute video on this topic. And I thought it was very well done. And that's really where the bulk of my presentation came from in terms of the information I shared with you today. So I hope that you found this helpful and interesting. And please consider liking and sharing this video. And absolutely consider subscribing if you want more material like this. And leave comments below as to what you found helpful about this video and what you'd like to see in the future. I appreciate you watching. And as always, be empowered.